So welcome everyone. Today is the 23rd of February and it is office hours, Grace hour. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you all. We're going to be talking about APIs. Woo! APIs. As I get really excited to talk about API. So any questions or concerns? I have my second screen up here, my second screen being my laptop. So if you have questions or concerns, please let me all know, post in the chat, but we will get on started. So APIs. If y'all maybe checked out a little bit, it's okay, because APIs is one of those topics, it's all right. What is an API? Like, what are those? It's this really long name. If you don't know, I'm kind of here to shed a little bit more light and clarification on APIs. What should you know at this point? When we're going to use it, how we're going to use it, stuff like that. So API, the basic understanding, if you get nothing from this, is that there are two technologies or systems talking to one another. Okay. The primary one is to share data, but it's not the only thing that it does, right? It doesn't just share the data from your database, it actually can do other things. And one of the major things that it does is actually connects processes. So for instance, these are just examples, but there are APIs to develop like data science, learning algorithms. There are APIs to process payments that we probably do every single day or definitely every month. There's APIs to like map our location. There are many APIs to do many different things. And this is one of the primary reasons why we have to have a good understanding of APIs in order to work with them. So this is a basic understanding. They do the heavy lifting for us. They do the things that we don't want to do. They go under the hood. We don't have to. Okay. If you want to have a deeper understanding of them, definitely dive into some more documentation on just like API development and all that type of good stuff. You can actually create your own API. And while in the course, you would technically create your own API. So that'll be fun. So with that being said, that is the basic understanding of APIs. Just in case I'm speaking too fast, I'm going to try and slow down a bit. Okay. I also attached a video here where it gives like a 5-minute, more of a 5-minute video of what an API is, a little bit more in depth. So if anyone wants to check that out, I'll make sure to put that here. Okay. So next thing. So how do APIs even talk to one another? So again, the basic understanding is that for APIs to talk to one another, we send a request. And when the API receives that request, it sends out a response. That response is with JSON. Some of these things is going to look very familiar to you if you've taken a previous step or just have previous coding experience. And Willow is going to get more into depth into this in the upcoming classes. But in order to send a request, we're going to have to use an HTTP request. You have your gets, you have your post, you have your put and delete. All right. And it has, when you're trying to work out CRUD, which we'll probably talk about, I believe, next week, it'll go more into that. Okay. So this is just a little bit of a little summary of what you're going to expect it to know. But this is essentially, hey, I need a request from this API, this other system or technology, and I want some information back. And this is how we talk to it. And then once that system or API receives that request, it's going to send something back to us. And most of the time, it's going to be in a form of a JSON. Okay. This is primarily, if not 100% of the time, you're going to work with here in the program. Okay. In this program, you're going to be working with JSON, JavaScript object notation, JavaScript objects. Okay. This is what it stands for. This is actually what it looks like here a little bit. So that's how they talk to one another. They communicate with one another. Cool. So the next one is why do we even use them? Now, technically speaking, if you don't want to use an API, you probably don't have to, but you don't want to do that to your life. You don't want to have the pain of building out every part of your site. You don't want to do that. there's data out there. Someone already collected it. It's in a database somewhere. It's in a form. It's in what we call Internet of Things and IoT. And the basic meaning of that is anything that connects to an internet. So that not only for your phone and your cars, but it also, if you have like anything smart, anything, if it connects to the internet, they can collect data. So if you ever have like, you know, back when I used to count my steps, you know, I would have something called Fitbit. I don't know if people have a Fitbit, they have the smartwatches now, but they will track my steps and everything like that. It's actually sending the data to Fitbit, and they're tracking, okay, what the average person like walks in this particular area, so they can get a lot of this data. So anything that connects to an internet, this is why we use the API. And then also other reasons why we may use them is for custom integrations. So when you get more experience in your programming, you're going to find out that you're going to find out that you can actually use them for things like login and registration, processing payments, tracking customers, things of that nature. And I'm going to show you an example what in real life you would actually do. You don't need to know it, but this is just an example. So there are things that are already built out for us that we don't have to manually program, and we can just automate with this API service or system. Anyone else have questions on like the first few slides that we went through? Anything that I go too fast? Any type of feedback will be good before I go to one of the last slides here. Cool. All right, so this is actually a real life example. I'm actually going to put this in slideshow mode. So here, this is a real life example of how you're going to use APIs. I'm going to repeat myself. You do not have to know what all this stuff does. I'm just sharing this with you that this is what the API does for you. When you implement a API, this is an example. So this one here on the left over here, this is how Apple Pay is doing a purchase for you, and this is what an API does when it comes to like paying at a shop or something like that. So there are probably like maybe 3 or 4, even more APIs that work together to just process one payment. And this is the power of APIs. This is why we want to use them. And this is why they're really important, and why more than likely when you go on the job, you're going to be using an API, okay? So sometimes there's APIs to, you know, uncrypt or decrypt tokens. Sometimes there's some that has maybe it's API of banks or their routing numbers or something like that. There's some for authorization. There's some things for hashing. There's so many APIs to do so many different things. So this is the real world example of what you would actually do in a real life scenario. Again, you don't have to do this stuff, but this is what the API is doing for us in the back end under the hood. And the last slide is, okay, great. Well, what's this all mean for us? What do I need to do in order to use this API? Primarily things, it's not everything, but primarily what you're going to use for an API is these 4 basic things. Really the top 3, but I added in this 4th because just in case you start exploring different APIs. But essentially, you're going to need the base API link, the endpoint. And it's going to look something like this. Sometimes it will have an HTTPS, sometimes it will not, okay? We're going to be using the not HTTP, no, I'm sorry, no, we're going to be using the not S over here, HTTPS. We're just going to use regular HTTP. The S is for like secure, that's a whole nother license type thing, don't worry about that, but we're going to be using just regular HTTP. So, but if you look at other APIs, they may have HTTPS, just letting you guys know. But you're going to have this endpoint here. This is the base link. This is what's going to connect to that API. You're also going to need the type of request. So how are you going to communicate with that API? That could be a GET, that could be a POST, PUT, delete. There are other requests, but you don't need to know that for right now. But these are the primary ones you're going to need for the program. and you're going to need your inputs. For this program, the primary input you're going to use is an ID, typically. Okay, not 100% of the time, but most of the time, the only parameter you're going to really pass is the user ID. Okay, or the non-user ID that you're trying to get. I'll say that as well. And it will look something like this. Well, not like exactly like this, but something similar. And the last thing, if you're playing with certain APIs, such as Google, Spotify, certain currency APIs, etc., you're going to need an API key. So we don't give you those types of APIs to work with, but if you're going into projects and algos, something for you to look up. But for the most part, the top 3 is what you're going to use for this current cohort. Okay. There was a question in this chat where which part of this is an example of an API. So I'm going to see if I can go back. So this is just the processes of like how to process the information from when the customer puts in their banking information to when, hey, the order is confirmed. So like as an example, there's maybe some type of token service or some type of API to decrypt tokens. That's just as an example. So again, you don't need to know the intricacies or like how to really work step by step, but this is like part of the API. This is a part of an API that you would probably use in a real life scenario. So hopefully I was able to answer your question, Kat. And then I see
I can go in there just real quickly.
Sure.
So because that's a great question, Kat. So if we're just looking at this customer payment flow, right? Immediately, really what an API is going to do, and I'm going to talk kind of in depth about it because I know yesterday was a little bit more of a struggle, is just, you can kind of think about it as somebody who's commanding traffic, right? It's taking in this response. It's identifying what kind of response, whether it's get, post. Today, we'll talk about put and patch, the difference between those two, which are like our edits, and then delete, right? And it's saying, okay, you're a get request. Cool, I want you to go this way, right? Or you are a post request wanting to do X, Y, or Z. I'm gonna send you here. And so if we're looking at this, just in this portion right here, there's probably some sort of API, because what's going to happen is if I'm thinking about it, I have an iPhone. And so if I want to add a payment card to my passbook, what's going to happen is I'm going to go to this spot on my iOS and I'm saying, I want to add this card. And oftentimes what you have to do is you have to put the card and the security information. And then once you say, okay, right, what it does is it makes a request to the card. So like, let's say Amex might have an API. It makes a request and says, hey, this user is trying to add this card. Can you authenticate that this is the user that's associated with this card? And so Amex would have an API that does something. And we're going to talk today. They're going to go check their database. They're going to say, okay, cool. Here's our response. Either yes, this card belongs to this person that's just logged in, or no, it doesn't. So therefore don't add it. So here would be some sort of API piece that there's some sort of, them trying to add this card. Then you're going to go to purchase, right? And you might have a couple different things that's going on where you are purchasing and you need to see all of the items, or a company might have. So there's just throughout this entire process, you're going to have things where you are pulling and getting data. Again, APIs like a traffic signal person, right? Saying, okay, they want to purchase this, let's go here. They want to do this, let's go here. They want to create an account. Let's say you want to go purchase, and they go, okay, have you created an account yet? Nope. Okay, well, I'm going to send you here first. Go ahead, create this account. Then once we create the account, we say, okay, yes, sign up. When we sign up, that's a post request. So then it's going to send that information to their API. They're going to go to our database, create our profile. It's going to give a response. So throughout this entire thing, I think what Gray was trying to communicate is there's a ton of different APIs throughout this entire process. Here could be an API. Here could be an API. Maybe here is an API with this authenticate user if they're using another company to authenticate. You know, like when you're trying to sign up for a company, sometimes you can do an email and a password, or you can use Google authentication, or Facebook, or Apple, or Microsoft. I don't think Apple really does it because they do Face. When that's happening, they are calling on the Google account and saying, hey, we're trying to make this request to Google. This person's trying to say they want to create an account and they want to use this Google account. Are they legit? Does this email and password match? And they give a response. If yes, they do. Okay, cool. They're authorized. Now let's go to the next stage. Does that make sense? So there's just throughout this, there are APIs and there are different requests being made throughout this entire process.
Yep.
That help? Cool.
Yeah,
Go
cool.
ahead.
Thank you so much, Will, for that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So again, this is the power of APIs, why we use them, why it's really important that we learn how to use them. They could be a little scary, you know, like, whoa, super techie, Gray, what are you talking about? But the more you get used to them and how they're really part of the system that you use, systems that you use every single day, it'll kind of maybe lighten the load in terms of like complexity of their complexity. Because there are certain APIs a little bit easier to use. Some of them on purpose are a little bit harder to use because of the nature of it. So anything like login or authentication, anything where money is being exchanged or identity, you want to make sure that's pretty secure. So that API is probably not going to be the easiest to work with, and so on and so forth. So glad. Any other questions before we go to some code? Anyone have questions on anything that I've talked about? If I went too fast, make sure, you know, hey, could you go back to this part and explain it? Anything at all before we move on to the coding part?
So I'm kind of curious. You talked about projects and algos, which I think a lot of us are going to next.
Mhm.
What kind of APIs kind of do we expect to be using? Is that just going to be based upon what projects we're building? Is there a
Yeah.
thing for that, or
Nope.
are we going to get a more in-depth, introduction to them, or how's that work?
Yeah. Well, no, you're not. And so, alas. So we'll keep doing that. And in week 7 and 8, I'll try to add in some stuff because I know a lot of you guys are going to that, to where maybe we'll build a product that, like I used to do Google Maps. So we create an application where basically somebody has like a user and then they put an address. And then what we'll do is call the Google Maps API for that address. And when we go to their profile, we can sort of see, think of like a Yelp, right? So we can do that. We can integrate some of those APIs. What'll happen in projects and algorithms is it's totally up to you. Now, there are some parameters that your instructor will give you, or some sort of things to think through, because these are portfolio projects. These are sort of, as a recruiter's looking at you, you should have a portfolio and saying, here's what I did and I created. It'd be dependent on what you're trying to create. I am an advocate of using as many free APIs because it can make it robust and it's very quick. As long as you sort of know how an API works, you can do that pretty quickly. And again, just like something easily as adding in a Google Maps is fairly easy. And then all that has to happen is, you just add in this API request. Now, Google Maps is the only challenging thing is, like Gray was talking about, what an API key does is it allows people like Google, like, because there are some free APIs, the ones that we've worked with are free. Swappy is like the Star Wars API, that one's free. Then there are paid APIs. And that's a huge like software as a service sort of thing, where you're not, a lot of companies just have this database or have this functionality that you can, kind of make a request to, and they give you a response, but you might have to pay per request. So like example, yesterday I was talking about that shipping label with Ship Engine, and it's 2.5 cents per label, right? And so with that, what an API key does is it says, okay, I have this account. This user I logged in, created an account. They give me this unique key, sort of think about it like a social security number. So that way, whenever a request is happening, I am passing in my API key. So that way they know how many requests I've made. And at the end of the month, they can bill me. Okay, you've made 100, so you owe me $2.50. So, I try to use as many free APIs as I want, or as you can, especially during class, because also transparently, if you have an API key that costs money and you somehow, you're like, oh, here's my project. You accidentally put it on GitHub. A lot of people do it and it's just because people lack character, is they'll find API keys that are out there and then they just use them. Maybe they're doing them, maybe they have an application and it's going to integrate Google Maps, but instead of them paying for it, they have your API key. So now it goes to your account. And then for a month, you could have a bill of $1,000 or something. And then they just go on to the next one, right? Like that's a very common thing. So you'll want to make sure. And that's why in class, I usually don't do API keys that cost money, but I can always start and stop if necessary.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, some of them, some API keys don't cost anything. Some, not all, obviously. But you would, depending on the project that you would like to do, you can always look that up. There's some resources that we have. We can use APIs. And even if you want to do your project in Java or Python, you can still do that. With your knowledge of JavaScript stack, you can still be able to implement that API within that Java or Python project. Obviously, slightly different syntax, but if you're going to do a Python or Java, you would actually use just vanilla JavaScript and use like fetch, which you guys have some type of idea. But when that time does come, if you are going to do it in a non-JavaScript stack project, you know, we got you covered too. So yeah, but any other
So that's why there's so much information at the end of each stack about APIs and stuff like that, is because of projects and algos.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering about that because it didn't make any sense to me. It's just like, well, I mean, it's over. It's a cool piece of information, but why? And now I kind of understand why.
Yeah, it's projects and algos, but it's also just because APIs are such a big portion of development, and there are certain APIs that you can only request in C# or in Python. Python and JavaScript are usually pretty open. Java's also another popular one, but I mean, some are, you know, they don't do Python, they just do JavaScript and C#, you know, and then so that's why we sort of try to say, okay, if you're going to deal with an API with Python, every API will often per language handle it differently, or there's an SDK that they can do. So it's also language specific as well. So that's another way.
Yep. Also, you're not required for your project and algos. I've taken project as a TA. So you're not required to use it. For those who are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do all that. That's okay. You're technically going to be learn how to create your own APIs here. But if you want to kind of get a head start on that and have an understanding of it, this is a really good head start of that. So hopefully we didn't freak out anyone else, but any questions or concerns before we move into a little bit of some code here. Ooh. Cool, all right. I want to take you guys silent as a thank you, Kat. I appreciate your emojis. All right. Cool. So we can move on to some code. So we're gonna move this to the side, and we're gonna go to our React tab. Now, I'm going to comment this out, as you saw. I was playing with it. So some things are gonna be new, and other things are gonna be refresh. But not really too much new. It's just really refresh. So we have our regular component, gray hour 2, really original. I know. And we're working with some state over here. And it's like word and click word. Only reason I did it this way was to see a difference between, hey, we're using use effect here and using an on click here. So I'm not gonna really focus too much on the use effect, by just showing that, like showing the differences between the two, so to speak. So when you are going to work with an API, typically we're going to work with that endpoint. You can put it in a variable like this, or you can just put it directly into your statement. Willa's going to talk more about Axios in office hours, so don't worry about the syntax of this. Just know that it works basically the same as fetch, it's just slightly different syntax. So don't worry about that there. But this is our request, right? This is the API that we're working with. And I like words, so I actually use this dictionary API. And this dictionary API looks something like this. This is our response. When you type this in here with your endpoint with the word, so this is how it's used. So this is free dictionary API here. You can try it here. Mango, and then it'll search something for you, and then it'll give you back some information. So this is the response. So I'm gonna go back. So I went a little fast. You're starting off with the endpoint. This endpoint is this right here. This is how we read documentation. This is how we get familiar with, like, okay, what is this thing even saying to us? So yeah, we're starting off with here. This is our endpoint. And it says, according to the documentation, it says the basic syntax of a URL request to the API is shown below. Now, this is one of literally the most straightforward ways of documentation for APIs you're going to get. And I planned it out that way. So again, you can get used to it, but how you're going to access it will be slightly different because it's a dictionary API. So it says, like, hey, we're going to use this endpoint, right? This right here, this endpoint. And it says we're going to attach this parameter of a word. So this is the input. This is what we're going to insert into. So in this case, I put in mango, and what we're doing is I'm clicking on this. This is an on click. I know it's an on click because I just know it. Well, you see it's changing. Well, some probably CSS stuff, but anywho, but we're sending a request to say, hey, I want to get this word called mango. And it sends us to the information, and look here. This is what is being sent back. You see this URL over here? Okay, this is what's going on. And it's giving us a lot of things back. As you can see here, it's one object, this big old thing. This is your whole entire object. And when you're working with it, one of the first things I encourage students to do, print your console your response. Whether you say response as a full word or res, is up to you. But make sure it this is in conjunction with, the same naming conventions. So pinch your response. This is your whole entire response. And as you see here, this one is slightly different. It says, hey, it gives you a 0. And it's basically saying it's technically an array, and I have some other things in here as well. So it's saying, hey, I want to access the first item in this array. And it is only one thing in there. This is how they set it up. It could be sometimes confusing, but this is what they did. And these are the attributes. You have something for phonetics. You have something for meanings. And we don't really care too much about license. And then source URLs, we don't really care about that either. But the primary thing is that, hey, it has this key called word. This is what we put. And then it has like these two objects attached to it called phonetics and meaning. So depending on the data that you're getting back, will determine how you're going to access this dictionary. This JSON object over here. Okay. So this is, again, according to the documentation, we're going to put in this endpoint and we're going to add our word. When you're doing that here, because this is a parameter, we want to be able to use some JavaScript. Why am I forgetting the name? Some backticks. Goodness, string interpolation. Hopefully, I'm saying that correctly. Yep. Thank you. So here we're saying, hey, I want to pass in this word. I want to add it to the back of my URL over here, and that's essentially what's going on. It's the exact same thing if I did this. Okay, it's the exact same. If I did this, if anyone wants to see if it will. Okay, and if I'm like, oh no, I want to do this, it's the exact same. This and this is acceptable. 100% acceptable. Whatever you would like to do, it's the exact same. Okay, so for right now, we're just using that. So we'll go back to my React app. So right now, again, regular app that we have here. So right now, I'm console logging right now, pineapple. That is the word I chose, pineapple. I know. But as you see here, the use effect, it displays it because, we have our state and so on and so forth, but it's not really doing the job. So when you're using something like use effect, you want to make sure that how am I going to access this information? That's for one. And also two, does this need to be in a use effect or should it be in a submit handler? For this case, it would make actually sense to do a on click as opposed to a use effect. But I wanted to show you all the difference between when you're using something like use effect, and Will's going to get more into it. But this is just more of a a basic understanding. If I want my user to see information on the page, I want to use use effect. I don't want them clicking on anything. I just want the information there. when they come to this page, I want this list typically, or array, excuse me, it's a JavaScript, to be available to them. So you want to be able to think about, do I want my user to click on something to get data, or do I want this information to be on the page when it's rendered? That is a difference between, well, one of the major differences between using a use effect and a submit handler. They are both functions. Use effect is a function, it's a hook, and submit handler is a function, it's an event listener. We're listening to our event. Okay, so they're both functions, but in certain situations, we want to be able to use a use effect. In other situations, we want to use an on-click. In the program, you'll be using both. And both of them are going to be using a request. You're going to be making requests to the APIs. So here, I'm just showing the differences between using a use effect and an on-click with an API. We're going to be doing very similar things to it, but we have to go about it in different ways. I'm going to take a little pause just in case anyone has questions thus far. Any questions, concerns? 1s and 0s in the chat, or 0.5s, whatever you like to give, and everything. How will API, so then it says, how will I import API to React? So in React, you're not importing anything, but how we access it is through this endpoint over here, right? So we have access to this right here. And we are using this Axios. Will's going to get more into Axios. It's kind of like fetch. So yesterday we talked about fetch. It's like, oh, we're fetching this information. So we'll wait for this one. Don't get too much on this. Don't get too focused on this here. But we're accessing it through this endpoint, and we're putting it into this Axios function over here. Okay. It's what we did for fetch. So there are 2 different ways for us to do it, but we're doing it through this get request over here. Does that make sense then?
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Cool, cool. All right, so we're getting this information from our API, yes, we're getting this information from our API. This is our API, this is the endpoint. And we're, according to the documentation that we read over here, we need to pass it a word, a parameter. Okay. It gives us an example here. What we're doing here, we're typing in mango, and this is the response, excuse me, the response from our get request, and it's doing that right here. Now we want to be able to do it in our app. Okay, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. So our endpoint, this is our API. We're inserting it in here. We're gonna get to the Axios in a moment with Will, and then we're passing in this parameter called word. Okay. When it comes to the promise, right? Will talked a little bit about this yesterday. It's returning a promise to us, and we want to be able to, at first, console log it. We want to know what this looks like. So for this case, I don't have anything in my click one. So this is my submit handler, again, my function. This is my form. My form is, where'd it go? There we go. This is my form. Has my on submit. On submit is my event handler, and it's taking in a function called submit handler. That's all it's doing. I have my name as click word, the value is click word, and I'm checking my on change is here. I'm just doing it the shorthand way. Okay, so it's nothing new that we've come across, but we're just going to be using this over here, right? So does anyone want to give me a word that they want me to look up? As you can see, I have several words that I looked up. But if anyone wants to give me a word, we can kind of like go through this object and see the data that we're trying to explore. Okay. Anyone, a word, any word. Gray, auxiliary. Super. Oh boy, funny. I will go with auxiliary. Thank you, Kat. Oh boy. So I'm gonna put this in here. And as you can see, this is my state. It popped up right away. And the only reason it popped up is because I just put my clipboard there. So I'm really doing this far, but when I press submit, of course I'm getting an error on my click. Sorry. Now I get a
It's
error on my, pardon?
It's spelling.
Oh, it's not a real word? Oh, so, all right.
No,
we're
she
gonna do-
reposted. She reposted.
Oh, no worries. I didn't know how to spell auxiliary, auxiliary either. Auxiliary. All right, cool. A person or group that acts in a auxiliary manner. This is a terrible dictionary API. But anyway, we're gonna just put it that one there. So auxiliary. Okay. Submit. So as you can see here, I just have a simple, like for my prevent, I clicked it. So we know that, hey, this is clicked. And I'm getting some information back over here, right? Now, it says, and it automatically, again, this is not built out in a way that it receives. Obviously, we don't want this there. It's not user friendly, but it's just to show like what's really happening here. So with that being said, to show what's really going on, so how this like on click is, I want to show this part. So we're going to refresh the screen one more time. So right now we're going to go back to Pineapple and let's just see like what the submit is actually doing for us. So as we're typing in something, this is our response object. And I'm going to have this up a little bit. Our response object is this bad boy. This thing here. And it looks like super intimidating. Like, what is this? Whoa. And a lot of times what we're going to typically do is go into the data object. 9 times out of 10, I would even say 9.5 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, especially for this course, we're going to be using res.data. We always want to go into that data object. So I'm going to comment this back in. And we're breaking down this object so you know what is to be expected of you here in terms of that there. So now we're going to refresh it again. I have to refresh it because this is the Axios file. So now this is a res.data. This is what we're getting now. So we're peeling back that layer. So the first one is a response. And we say, hey, we have an object called data. So I want to use dot notation to access this data object. Okay, that's what we want to do. So we're using dot notation. Dot notation is how you access your object. Okay, remember that. Dot notation is how you access your object. So now we are in our res.data and look, we have something called two objects. Now for this display purposes, typically I've only seen, one, which is 0, but apparently there's 2 of them in here. But we're only going to just do the first one because most of them have 1 here. So now I want to go to the third part. So we have to continue to access our object, but it looks like there's now an array. Now with this API, it's actually telling us the data structure. If it's an array or is it an object, okay? Your objects are not going to be this complex, but I want you to kind of get used to it. So what we're going to do is say, hey, we want to go into the first object in that array, which is 0. So we're going to comment back this in. So now I'm going to refresh again. And now we have the first item in this array, and it looks like it has an object. So again, same word, still pineapple and so on and so forth, still there. But now we're able to have access to other things in here. So it looks like it's something called word, then a phonetic, like how you say it. There's something called meanings there. There's a few things in here. Okay, and this is what's in this object. So now if I want to be able to access, this array. So if I want to be able to access this information, this array, then I'm going to go to my 4th step over here. I am now saying, hey, in this res object and this data object, there's an array. I want to access the first one. And then there's something called meanings there. I want to be able to do that. So now I'm peeling back that layer. I'm peeling back the layers. This is a pretty big object. You want to be able to pinpoint where the information is. So with that being said, now it's this object. Now it says, hey, well, you have something called in this meanings one, you have something like parts of speech, you have a noun, definite, it has all this stuff. So, and every single time I'm coming here into my code, and I already did this all the stuff. I did a lot of stuff for you guys because it took me a minute to get. So again, this is not what you are going to have to do. Most of the APIs is going to have like res.data.results, res.errors.errors.message. Like it's not going to be that deep, but you need to understand how to access your data. This is how you do it. This is how you have your response. You go into another object called data. Sometimes you have another object, but in this case, there's an array. So this is how we're accessing it through this array. And in that array, there's objects, and we're accessing that there. So I know that was a mouthful, but this is just showing what the onClick is actually doing, and I'm just sharing it through the use effect. So the last part, now we have this here, is get the definition. And the definition is here. I was able to access it through this. And it says a tropical food plant, ananas, I don't know what it is, but it's the fruit of South America. Cool. So if I type in like pineapple here, pineapple, oopsie. If I type in pineapple, I think I spelled it wrong. Sorry. There you go. Apple, it automatically, by that onClick, it gives us the information that we want. Obviously, we don't want this. This is not user friendly. That's not the point of it. But it's the point of this is to see, hey, I'm going to get an object back from my API. How do I access this? So I know this, you're going to need more practice with this. This is not how yours is going to be. It's going to be different. But hopefully I was able to convey what the message is of how to access your data. Any questions or concerns? And I know this questions because this was hard for me when I was at the camp. So please let me know. Hey, what about this? Could you elaborate more on this? Let me know, please.
Why is there a question mark after the data?
This, you probably won't use this in the program, maybe in project analysis, but what this means is an optional chaining. And basically, in short, if it's there, show it. If it's not there, skip it. So sometimes some of these words may not have meanings, or maybe it may not be the first one of this here. Again, I chose words that would typically have like a meaning in the first one, but sometimes they won't have it. So it kind of prevents it from breaking. That's what it's there for.
Kind of like a catch, so to speak. It's just like if this happened, like, or an if statement almost, or either or. It's like if it's there, show it. If not, skip it. Yeah,
kind of, sort of. This problem is pretty common if, say, for instance, when you change your database, and maybe you have one attribute that's not there, and after you changed it, but you have other objects that does have that attribute. So this word would have had an attribute of meaning and another attribute of like the sound. But maybe some words don't have the sound in there. What are you going to do? So that's essentially like what that does. You don't have to use it. It's just there because I was playing with the API. I was getting some errors, but you don't have to use it. You don't have to know it, but it's just there just in case you do get some errors.
Sounds like something you should know, though.
Yes, yes, it is very good to know it.
Yeah, you could also say like, it's instead of having to do like conditional statements, like if, this data has a meaning key, then do this. Like you can do that, you just see the question mark and say, hey, if it's there, then go ahead and look at it. But if it doesn't have that, instead of it, if you didn't have that and you try to console log res.data of position 0 dot meaning to position 0 and it doesn't, it's going to say that key doesn't exist and you're going to get an error. And so what Gray is saying is, hey, sometimes in our responses back, we're getting some things have a meaning. It's a little bit more in depth, and other times it doesn't. And so if it does have it, go ahead and show that. But if it doesn't have that, don't break, because I'm not saying it has to, like, that's exactly what I'm calling.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and
Kat,
if
you had a
like an
question?
if else would do sort of the same, but that's a bad way to put it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so I pretty much get how to go through like the response, like the JSON object. It's kind of like a dictionary in other languages. I
Mhm.
was just wondering if you could quickly, or not depending on time, just kind of go through like the process of like Pineapple in the code, because I kind of get what it's doing where you're in the inspect tool showing like the response, but maybe just kind of like what it's doing in the like code to get that response.
So do you mean that, let me see here. So on every time I use dot notation, you're saying like,
Before that,
well, before the response?
so you're like saying your endpoint and you're saying that you want to get that from the response. What's making that appear on the screen?
She's using state up here, right? Isn't that what that is
Yes.
doing? Passing in Pineapple. And so from state, passing in endpoint and injecting this slash whatever's in state, and we started at Pineapple. That's what word is. Is that what you
Okay.
mean? Is that what you mean, Kat?
Like how am I getting the information back from the API? Is that what you're saying, babe? Before I enter this word?
No, I see you console logging it. I don't see how it's like appearing on the screen is what I mean.
Oh, so Pineapple is not appearing on the screen. Pineapple is not. So this side is your Axio. Sorry, this side is your use effect. This side is your on click. I wanted you to see when you use dot notation. That's why I use the use effect on here. But use effect wouldn't work on a project like this, because what the use effect is doing is running the page every type of change, because I have an on change function right here. So I have my on change is tracking every single change, and making that API call, that's way too many requests. Here, that's way too many things. So I was just sharing, hey, if you just have one thing that you're trying to render, this Pineapple as an example, this is how we access it. But the reality, when you're doing your project or something similar, you're going to have an input and press submit and click it, and then get that, and then receive the response from the request.
Okay.
So this part, yeah. So this part is not, it's not showing up at all. I made it so that that way, but I really want to demonstrate this part, the on click, because this is what we have done. That this is what the on click is doing. So if I just did this here, this will look like, how did you even get this? But I got this because every time I was console logging, I was diving a little bit deeper down into my object, and I'm just setting it here. So same concept that I'm doing up here, because if I don't do the same thing here and set my click word, I'm going to get an error in my on click.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Good question. All right. So it is 2 minutes to lecture time. Does anyone have any last minute questions? I saw, Chris, you're like tons of concerns, but that's just lack of familiarity. Will's gonna go into more in Axios, so he's gonna explain all this type of stuff. This is just a little bit, hopefully, please put ones and zeros in the chat if you have a better understanding of APIs, of even it's a basic understanding, how you're supposed to use it. Ones and zeros in the chats to let us know And if we need to, like, you know, create some more content or more practice or talk a little bit more about it, like, please let us know.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in depth on APIs today. We're today's a very, very easy kind of day. We're just gonna introduce Axios. We're gonna talk about try catch, but I will be going in depth on APIs, and we're gonna just start from again. That you know, Grays might be a little bit more advanced, but we should hopefully have a much clearer understanding after today.
Cool. So hopefully I didn't lose too many of you guys. Hopefully not. I didn't want to do too much new stuff, but that was like my purpose of like, hey, what's actually in this API call? Like, what are we really getting back? So if anyone has any more questions or concerns, please write in the chat. Because then I could also mention it during Will's lecture. If there's, you know, any questions or that may come up or anything like that. So please let us know if we need to do a better job of like relaying the information, but APIs can be tough. But thank you all for coming to office hour, hanging out with me. And I guess I will end today's office hour.
It's 20 hours.
Right on time. Look at that. Thank you, Tessa.